Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everyone. Are you getting that snow that Boston's getting up there in Northampton?
I the western part of the state is not being hit as hard as the eastern
Okay.
part, but it's still pretty crappy. My children have not had a full week of school in 5 weeks. So
Which is not good for mom and dad.
no, this is
People don't think about that.
if I seem more incoherent than usual, that is why. And then next week is winter break. How much can they torture me? Uh,
Yeah. So, but I know in Boston, it's been essentially snowing since before the Super Bowl.
right.
I think it's four storms or something, three or four.
I mean, we've
and
had
another one
we've
on
had
the
all the
west.
same storms. We live in a bit of a microclimate. We're in a valley, so sometimes we're insulated from some of the bigger snowfalls. But you're still talking several feet, total accumulation for the year. And I happen to live in a part of the street. I live on a relatively main street close to downtown, and so the plows come, they dump a whole bunch of snow right in my driveway, 5 times a day when the snow comes. It all gets packed in like a solid block of ice that I gotta chip away at. So that kind of drives me a little bonkers. And there may and
Yeah.
there's at least two more snowfalls coming. It seems in the next several days. So we're not done.
Wow. Well, batten down the hatches, man. Drink something to keep you warm and keep plugging away. It's been an interesting this second straight week where I feel like we've got a lot to talk about, and I think the big, this sort of big stories that happened. We're taping this Wednesday morning, so I guess Tuesday night. The big stories were Brian Williams taking a a 6-month suspension, which a lot of people think implies that he's done as the anchor of NBC Nightly News. And then Jon Stewart apparently stepping away at some point or retiring from The Daily Show at Comedy Central. Huge media stories. Drudge had headlines: the end of real news and the end of fake news. But these are huge stories, serious and lots of angles we could take. But what are your thoughts, Bill?
Well, last week, I was a little sympathetic to Brian Williams not having gone through the whole dossier, but so my gut was saying this is a human error that a lot of people make, and just not necessarily on as big a platform as he is. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's not a good reporter, or the NBC News team are not good reporters, and you can't trust anything that they say. Now, it appears that in going through other statements beyond this one Iraq war story, that there have been other instances of embellishments that have raised questions, which seems to suggest that they have to spend a lot more time sifting through it, and he can't just come back to work immediately. And
yeah, wasn't there a story like I've only just sort of peripherally heard some of these, but like there's a story about him being mugged when he was younger, and the question as to whether or not that happened. There was a question as to
Katrina
whether or not
story.
he saw a corpse, allegedly saw a corpse like floating down Bourbon Street
Right.
or something in the French Quarter. And there's questions as to whether or not that happened. Can you think of others? I mean, that's 3 is a trend. So,
Well, so that's sort of the concern, and what obviously NBC has to worry about, whether or not it's fair or not. There's a brand question. If people aren't going to tune in because when they see the guy's face, they're going to say, "You don't talk straight to me." There goes your show. There's no getting around that. And if things are going to keep bubbling up over time, one anecdote after another, that was just going to be have a
but I
trickle
think
effect
that's
on
what
the show.
And I think that's really what did him in. It's the trickling out of this information. I think it's probably largely due to the whole story started, I guess, partly because of social media, people posting things on Facebook, which led to a Stars and Stripes article, which led to him, giving that non-apology apology or that awkward, unsatisfying apology. But I think that social media and new media has led to, and all the sleuths out there nowadays, and have led to the trickling out of information. Morton Blackwell, who my former boss, a conservative movement leader, he talks about snipping the puppy dog's tail off. So this is an analogy he gives to talk about handling negative information. So if you're the puppy dog, you're going to have your tail, you want that snipped one time, just be done with it, get it all out there. However, if it's your opponent, you don't want to just snip the tail off once, you want to snip it off inch by inch. And that's what's been happening to Brian Williams. He's had every day, it's something new comes out, so this story just gets progressively worse. It hasn't gone away, and I'm sure that people who specialize in handling negative information are going to make this into a case study.
Well, and you also have, as Dylan Byers at Politico has pointed out, this comes in the heels of the botching of David Gregory and Meet the Press, the botching of Ann Curry, and today. He's suggesting there's sort of a real crisis in the upper echelons of NBC News, period, that may lead to heads rolling in the executive suite. And Dylan's obviously the media is his beat, so I take his word over my outsider perspective. So I assume NBC is going to have some big problems to deal with over the course of the next several months. But putting that aside, I don't necessarily see some people say how the loss of Brian Williams is a disaster for NBC. Well, why is that? I mean, he's essentially a newsreader. There are other people who can read the news off a prompter. Not that it's like not that a monkey can do it, but there are other people in the world who do it. It is a replaceable position. It might require some promotional effort to build up someone's profile, so you win the ratings race every week. And I understand that there's effort involved in that. But it's a doable proposition. He's not Walter Cronkite.
Well, I think the problem is symbolic. Well, that you just mentioned Walter Cronkite, and that's where I was going with this. I mean, I think symbolically, the fact that we've had now two major network anchors, Dan Rather being the other, who have been caught up in duplicity, who've been brought down partially by social media or by new media, by the barbarians at the gate, sort of. It is a big deal in the sense that it kind of reinforces what a lot of conservatives and other outsiders have long felt about the mainstream media. And so symbolically, an anchor is sort of the face of the serious news, of the network news, which is still a big deal. But I think you're onto something, Bill. I think that there's no the days of Walter Cronkite are over, and so I don't know that people were really trusting Brian Williams that much anyway. Not that they distrusted him. It's just that being the anchor isn't what it used to be, and so the fall of an anchor ain't what it used to be. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, what is the nightly news these days? Not just NBC, but in general, it's mostly just regurgitating headlines that have been reported by other people. There's the occasional investigation. So it's not like there's zero independent news gathering by these divisions. But a lot of the news gathering that they do gets promoted on multiple platforms, not just on this one show. So
in a sense he's a news reader. But they do, all these networks do. I mean, I'm probably going to use CNN's slogan here, but the most trusted face in news or whatever. I mean, or the name in news. I mean, they do trade on that, like whether or not this could be sort of like one of those lies that like they tell us that they know it's a lie, we believe it, we know it's a lie, but it's still how they market these anchors, right? As the most trusted voice or whatever.
But you it's not like you read a bunch of news during the day and you say to yourself, I'm not sure I should trust this. Let's turn on NBC Nightly News and see what Brian Williams has to say about it. And if he says it, then I will trust it. Nobody goes about their lives like that.
Nobody does anymore, you're right. But there is this holdover from a throwback to a previous era where like the Nightly News was the gospel truth. And if the anchor, I mean, it's been said, of course, if Cronkite would have been elected president, I mean, so it's. I think you're right. We've moved on as a culture, as a society, but still there are like institutions and by the way, I think this speaks to a larger issue that I've had about anomie and atomization and the lack of trust in institutions. I mean, it's just like this is just one more brick being yanked out of the wall, the facade of there being adults in charge or elites, and so it's part of a larger narrative that whether it's Dan Rather, it's like this is just one more kind of example of the sort of trusted foundations collapsing as we go to this radical democratization of politics and of information and of media.
I just think that I think NBC obviously they got a lot of issues to sort out. Probably a lot of staff that's going to need to be changed because of this. But it's in many ways it could be an opportunity for them to say, let's rethink this whole operation. The reason we had nightly news shows going back to the 50s was a compact between us and the federal government that we were getting free spectrum and we would do public service programming in exchange of that. And they still get that deal, so they still have some obligation to repay with some public service programming. But obviously, people can get their headlines from lots of places now, and people can get their investigations. Most investigative journalism is not happening on TV. They don't necessarily have to keep the show. They could say to themselves, what is it that TV news can do that other news can't? And do that. There's ways to tell story by video that pack more of a punch than what you can do in print. There's things in print that can do that video can't. There's obviously lots of inventive ways that video news gathering is happening online. They should be thinking about how to modernize the whole project of TV news gathering and analysis, and not be trapped by a 50-year-old model that I guess they do it because it's still profitable. Obviously, the audience is aging, but it kind of runs itself. It's a pretty set formula, and they can stick to it and make some money off of it. But it's obviously not a sustainable model for the next generation. So why not blow it up and try to get ahead of the curve?
Okay, so I also do want to mention some kind of political aspects of this story. One, I think, is there were a lot of people, or at least some people, kind of making excuses for Brian Williams, talking about how our memory tricks us, and you may actually believe that you did something that you didn't do. Especially, you can understand this, like if you're involved, sort of the Rashomon effect. I mean, if you're involved in a high pressure situation, of different people will report on things differently. There were a lot of excuses made by some to sort of dismiss Brian Williams, especially when it was just this one isolated instance of the RPG fire hitting a helicopter or whatever. And I think there were conservatives who pointed out, like, remember when Steve Scalise had that whole thing, like, about he couldn't remember if the group he spoke to was a white supremacist group or whatnot.
Right.
So they weren't quite as forgiving of Scalise. So that's one political angle. I think the bigger one is that I had a reader who emailed me, and maybe this is like a common, maybe this is all over Twitter now, I don't know, but one reader emailed me, and I think made an interesting point, which is that it is interesting that Brian Williams was essentially fired yesterday for misleading people in order to make himself seem more cool, the same day that it was revealed that Barack Obama had intentionally misled people to increase his popularity. And of course, I'm talking about the revelation to come out of David Axelrod's new book, that President Obama's support of gay marriage was never sincere. And to me, what gets me about that is we all know that politicians mislead. And that they all probably say things they don't mean, but in 2004 Obama said, what I believe in my faith is that a man and a woman, when they get married, are performing something before God, So he repeatedly actually cited his his faith as a reason that he believed that marriage was between a man and a woman. And if in fact it turns out that he never really believed that, it's not just that he lied, but that he was lying about his deep-seated faith beliefs, which I think makes it more egregious.
Well,
what say you?
As I tweeted yesterday, Obama lied, people married. And one of the reporters of the Huffington Post picked it up and turned into Obama lied, people bride, which has more of a rhyme, but
people what?
People bride.
People
BRIDE.
Spell that for me. Oh, that makes no sense, Bill. Who are these people? I mean, I'm all for the clever rhyme, but come on.
That's it.
You.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no there's no president, there's no politician that has ever been 100% above board, totally honest, no filter. It's impossible because you are running as a representative of the people, and there's always a mixture between your personal convictions and being a reflection of public opinion. And every politician walks that line. Every politician takes some stance which goes against public opinion, and they frame it as, I'm standing on my principles and I'm doing what's right. But if they only did that all the time and never factored in public opinion, they wouldn't win offices. And so there's always a balancing act, deciding. I mean, Lincoln and FDR have always said things like, you go as far as the people will let you go. There was a sense in 2008 that the people were not going to let you go that far, and there was no.
Well, and he was, and I should point out, he was originally for gay marriage, then he was against it, citing his faith, at least to buttress that. Then he was for it. But okay, I'm hearing what you're saying, Bill, and I'm not saying that you're condescending here, but I'm obviously not. No, that sounds bad, but I know you're not. I know you're not doing that. But I'm a big boy. I mean, I think everyone watching this knows that politicians have to be strategic and how they do things. And this is not unique to Obama. But going to my larger point about this anomie and atomization and the loss of trust, the loss of consensus, the fact that we don't trust politicians or institutions anymore. And here you have, on the same day, Bill, evidence that an anchor of a major network nightly news broadcast lied to us, and that the President of the United States lied to us to get elected or to gain popularity or whatever. That's a big deal, and I don't want to be, I don't want to be naive, but I do think it's quite a coincidence that you have, the President of the United States and a nightly news anchor, two, at least symbolically, kind of moral, institutional establishment authority figures, that it coming out that they deceived us, essentially the same day. I mean, in the case of Brian Williams, he got the suspension. I don't want to be Pollyanna here, but shouldn't this be kind of a big deal?
I mean, I honestly don't believe. And look, polls, I'm sure, will bear this out. In short order. I don't believe that the average voter is mortified and shocked that Obama was political in his statements in terms of gay marriage over the course of his presidency. I don't think you're going to see some 10-point poll drop. He's been on the rise, getting to the upper 40s and hitting 50. I don't think it's going to revert back to 40 now, because I think almost everybody could see that there was politics behind these statements. And people assume that all politicians make statements like this. I mean, there was a point, perhaps maybe early on, where Obama was being presented as being more than a politician, transcending politics, and things like this could be used to puncture that persona. But I think we're all past that now. I mean, he's a human being to most people, and the fact that he already made this policy shift in the first place was evidence that there was political calculation behind this stuff, and most people are very accepting of that so long as they approve of the outcome. People are pretty Machiavelli at the end of the day. Willie Brown, who was the mayor of San Francisco, he once did a live performance with Bill Maher in Politically Incorrect, and he said on stage, I lie, I cheat, and I steal. And Bill Maher said, only in San Francisco can you get elected. But it's not true. You got reelected because he was considered competent, and people excuse a lot of sins if you're competent. So if the worst thing Obama's done in his presidency is that he made a political calculation to extend equal rights to people on the scale of presidential sins, that ranks very, very low, I think, in the eyes of most people. And I think, and I'm not putting you in this category, Matt, but I would imagine some conservatives are mostly mad that they can't defend their own continued discriminatory beliefs against gays by saying, "Oh, the president believes this too. He was against gay marriage in 2008, so why are you attacking me?" Now you can't say that anymore. That's probably what sticks to the most conservatives' craw.
I hear you. I just want to read. So I'm reading this off Think Progress, and this is from August of 2008, and a letter. This is in an interview with Rick Warren at the Saddleback Church.
Right.
And this is Obama, quote, "I believe that marriage is the union between a man and a woman. Now, for me as a Christian, it is also a sacred union. God's in the mix." So that alone doesn't. I think that certainly implies that. I believe that marriage is the union between a man and a woman.
That statement is about personal belief. It doesn't, in and of itself, speak to public policy.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. I think that's a sneaky way out of this. But okay.
Politicians are sneaky. Politicians are sneaky all the time. Good sneakiness.
It depends on what your definition of is, I suppose. But no, to me, I would just say that to me, the fact that Obama. So now we know from Axelrod's book that he was knowingly lying to the public.
Now, just as a factual point, Obama himself is criticizing Axelrod and saying actually Axelrod is misremembering that and saying that Obama was conflating things about personal feelings and political positions, and that he felt sincerely at the time that they could resolve this question of discrimination through civil unions and equal partner benefits. Now, I'm not saying that means you have to accept Obama's word on that, but just pointing out that he is disputing the Axelrod's characterization.
All right, fair, duly noted, and then I'm going to drop it, but I would just say, to me, the fact, it's one thing to mislead or to lie, but the fact that he cited his deeply held faith at a time when he presumably didn't actually hold that position makes it even more egregious. It makes you wonder what kind of person would do that. What kind of person is that?
A person who wants to win and get the things that he wants done.
Well, Brian Williams wanted people to think he was cool and that he was an interesting person who wasn't just a newsreader. Why is Brian Williams getting fired for the same thing that Barack Obama is getting a pass on?
Well, I mean, they're not parallel situations. I think you can make an argument that Brian Williams' sins, for the really aren't. I mean, obviously he said these things on the news, so I'm not saying that it's not off the job, but if it's isolated to his personal experiences, it doesn't reflect on his basic abilities as a journalist. He needs to make amends for the wrongs that he has made. but it doesn't necessarily say that he is unable to be a journalist and tell you things that are true. He has a weak spot in this one area. In Obama's case, it is a more classic example of a politician trying to balance personal belief and political strategy, which everybody does, and no one is 100% perfect on the subject. And if the ends he was trying to achieve are generally accepted by the public, people are not going to punish him for it.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing the comments and how the audience views this. Jon Stewart. I have a take on this. I'm numb. I'm comfortably numb. I mean, I have a take on this that's sort of not political. That's just in terms of Jon Stewart's career. But first, Bill, I mean, just your take as a liberal. Is this a big loss, and how do you feel about this?
Well, I have kept my distance from Jon Stewart in recent years. I actually have not watched regularly in a while. I fully copped to the fact that I thought he was unfair to Obama on more than one occasion in a way that I thought was not factually fair, and that made it harder for me to enjoy the humor. And so I watched less. I caught a clip here and there if something was getting passed around on social media. I think it's definitely a misnomer to suggest he was the Democrats' greatest cheerleader. He was pretty hard on Obama in a lot of cases, and maybe contributed to a dampening of enthusiasm amongst millennials for a lot of his criticisms. Now, obviously, he had more unanimous support on the left when he was excoriating the Bush administration. I think there's great nostalgia for sense that Stewart was doing what real news organizations should have done at the time. I mean, that's sort of where I think the notion of sort of fake news becoming real news sort of came into being, that he was doing things that other folks should have been doing and weren't doing. And I don't think that that was as true in the Obama years. Now, you can say he is being equal opportunity satirist by going after Obama, and I got no problem with satirists doing that. But was he doing things that no one else was doing? I mean, I think the shots he took at Obama, other people were taking those shots. You didn't need Stewart to take those shots. So he probably had a little less immediate relevance for that reason. But obviously, he still had a very loyal fan base, still did a lot of things that made people laugh and made people happy to see him do what he was doing. I think he was certainly at the top of his game and a cut above. He's one of the premier satirists of his generation, bar none. But at the same time, not irreplaceable. There are other satirists in the world. Someone else, by the mere fact that he's been able to cultivate Stephen Colbert and Larry Wilmore and John Oliver, who all doing or did great things in their own ways, is evidence that you don't need one person to do this stuff. And Stewart had a great team behind him too. I mean, there's a whole bunch of researchers that were behind a lot of his great sketches. So I would not presume that The Daily Show can't live on. I mean, there's always going to be space for daily satirizing of the news, and there's plenty of talented people out there who can do it.
And I think it is one of his legacies will be spawning those proteges to become imitators and to who are quite successful.
But now, can conservatives emulate this? I think that conservatives have tried to have sort of their own daily shows, and they've never really have clicked. And there was a time once when people said, that liberals weren't funny. Liberals were dour, PC nags, and Rush Limbaugh was showing how gleefully irreverent that conservatives can be. And I feel no one really says that anymore. I feel like, no one looks at Rush Limbaugh as America's great satirist. But you would think that political ideology would not limit one's ability to make a good joke. But do you have a sense of why? I mean, obviously there are folks, there are people who are sort of playing in that pool, like Dennis Miller and Adam Carolla. But no one who has achieved the stature of a Jon Stewart. Why do you think that is?
Well, first, I think you're right. By the way, Dennis Miller and Adam Carolla have a new podcast out. It's called Podcast or something. It's basically them ranting. It's quite good. I highly recommend it. And I think that what they do works is because they do comedy first. They're not, their goal is not to push an agenda. They are pros. They're two really funny people who don't need politics to get a gig, right? I mean, if you're a conservative comedian, that implies that you couldn't make it as a normal comedian, and you had to have an angle to get booked. And so I think that's part of the problem, inherently part of the problem. I think the arts just attract a certain kind of liberal worldview type person naturally. Maybe conservatives are more attracted to business or something. So there's a lot of inherent problems, but I do think the key is for people who have a conservative disposition, who go into the arts, whether it's comedy or whatever, don't wear your political philosophy on your sleeve. I'm not saying hide it. I'm saying be funny first. Like, deserve victory. Be that damn funny that you could get a show anyway. And then, of course, your worldview is going to come out in your art, just as it always does. That's how, the most insidious propaganda is that which appears to be neutral. And I think that the most effective people in terms of putting liberalism into the culture aren't doing it, they're not trying to infiltrate the culture per se. They're talented, smart, funny people who, by virtue of being out there, their worldview, seeps into their work. So I think that's part of it. There's a guy named Michael, I think his name's Michael Loftus, who's a pretty funny guy who's trying to do a conservative version of The Daily Show. It's not bad. I think there's promise. We'll see where that goes. There's also a show called Red Eye on Fox News, which airs at some ungodly hour in the middle of the night. Greg Gutfeld, Andy Levy, they're on the show. It gets great ratings. Apparently, the show, which airs, in the middle of the night, gets better ratings than a lot of shows that air, during prime time for other networks. So, I think that there's room for growth, but it's probably not as bad as some people think either.
Now, to shift gears, I had a piece over at Real Clear Politics earlier this week where I was critiquing the John Judas piece called "The Emerging Republican Advantage," and John Judas is someone who co-wrote the book "The Emerging Democratic Majority." So he was kind of backtracking from his earlier prediction that demographics were going to lock in Democratic majorities as far as the eye can see, a premise which seemed to bear fruit with Obama's victories in 08 and 12, which seemed to be propelled in part by demographic changes. Now he's arguing that there are white constituencies, blue-collar whites and middle-class office-dwelling whites who have recoiled at Obamacare and the stimulus, seeing them as redistributive programs that take from them and give to others. And that is cutting into Democratic support, which he argues, he said he's not predicting this, not saying it's certain to be true, but there's a chance that it could give Republicans the White House in 2016 and make it impossible for Democrats to ever take back the House in the foreseeable future. And I took issue with this. Not that these constituencies aren't mad at Obama for those reasons. I take the point. I was questioning whether you can treat their sentiments today into the future, and I went back to contrast Obama at year 7 to FDR at year 7, because this was the low point of FDR's presidential tenure. This was in 1937. He had the court packing debacle, which made people suspicious of FDR's lust for power. In the end of 37 and 38, he had the Roosevelt recession, which was ebbing by the midterms, but was still kind of lingering. And FDR tried to purge the conservatives out of his party because he was mad about the court packing stuff, and he wanted to fully reform the Democratic Party in a liberal mode. That backfired. The conservatives won anyway, and then Republicans had a great midterm, and that led to, even though Republicans didn't control Congress, you had a conservative majority in Congress, a bipartisan conservative majority that put a hammerlock on future New Deal reform. So if you were a pundit at the beginning of 1939, you would not be saying we were on the verge of a enduring Democratic majority and a liberal recalibration of the nation's center of gravity. You would be thinking this was slamming the door shut on the New Deal. So it's possible that if you have a couple more years of pretty healthy growth, economic growth, wage growth, job growth, Obamacare reforms continue to tackle healthcare cost inflation, people feel more comfortable with it. Will those white constituencies who are grumbling now take a look back at the full 8 years and say, you know what, that worked out pretty well for me and the rest of the country, a hell of a lot better than Bush did, and come back into the Democratic fold for a longer stretch of time. That's not a prediction. It's a plausible scenario, certainly based on the last few quarters and Obama's uptick in the polls. That I think it's premature to make grand pronouncements where these constituencies are going to line up. At some point, people, I think, are going to break the seesaw of politics we've had now and draw a conclusion. This party is doing a better job than the other party. Let's give them, some more time in charge. I don't know if you have a thought about that.
Well, my thought would be this question as to whether or not people will retroactively, sort of like maybe working class whites will retroactively think better of this era than they do now. Reminds me of this, I guess there's a really good piece in the Sunday New York Times this past week about 90s nostalgia. And, I think I talked about it here with Alex Seitz-Wald or something, but, I've argued that I think that there is such a thing as 90s nostalgia, and maybe it's misplaced, but and looking back, it was a time of peace and prosperity, and I think you could certainly argue a lot of our problems, the seeds of our problems today were planted during that time. Whether it's things like repeal of Glass-Steagall or whatever. I think that was that Obama? Was that I think that was Clinton.
Right.
I think that's Clinton. Or whether it was things like not getting bin Laden, or not the Cold or the First World Trade Center attack. I mean, not taking terrorism seriously, treating it as as sort of a police action. I mean, so I think there were a lot of seeds for chickens that came home to roost, so to speak. Probably a bad thing to say, but there were things that happened in the 90s that I think negatively impacted us down the road. But putting that aside, if you just look at the 1990s. And this piece in the New York Times, I think, makes the case pretty well. It's a pretty good time. And I think there are a lot of people today, and people who, sort of working class whites who hated Bill Clinton at the time. Slick Willie, all the philandering, and I think they look back now at Bill Clinton with some nostalgia and say, yeah, he turned out to be a pretty good president. He's so much better than Obama. In comparison to Obama, he's like this modern. I mean, I remember. That's one of the reasons, by the way, Bill, that I that like when I hear conservatives today say that Barack Obama is the most liberal president of all time and the socialist and the worst president ever, like I'm old enough to remember, and I have this memory that that's exactly what they said about Bill Clinton. And now some of those exact same people who said that about Bill Clinton are today saying, well, Bill Clinton was really just a moderate. He was temperamentally moderate. But Barack Obama, now he is a true believer. I was like, well, I remember. What about all this stuff about Hillary Clinton and Saul Alinsky? I mean, anyway, I'm sort of going on a rant here, but the point being, just as at the time it would have sounded absurd to look back at the 90s as this, the halcyon days, our salad days. People may look back at this era a little more fondly than we would imagine, considering all the turmoil, all the problems that we've had, yeah, it's possible that people look back and it's hard to predict the future.
And if I may say, I mean, I think the fact that, I mean, people called Clinton a socialist, a drug dealer, a murderer. Yeah, there was some pretty,
Vince Foster.
There was very harsh stuff being thrown around back then. Arguably harsher than what they say about Obama, and it does undercut the question that it's sort of just about race. I mean, I'm not saying there's no racism or anything, but I do think conservatives have had a pretty deep antipathy to Democratic presidents going back a long time. It's not strictly for
I've never bought the race argument. I've never bought the race argument either for that very reason, because they said horrible things about Bill Clinton. And by the way, the other side said horrible things about George W. Bush. I mean, I think we're kind of equal opportunity offenders at this point. But, and by the way, there is a Bush tie-in, because Bush has always argued that, it takes, what's the old line about, the French Revolution? We can't. It's too soon to say, how it turned out. I think it's an apocryphal line. But, I mean, Bush always said, the historians are still figuring out Abe Lincoln, that history will judge the Bush era, many years from now. And he always thought more kindly. There was a sense that it would be like Harry Truman, that he would get more popular. Well, guess what? George W. Bush has gotten more popular than he was when he left office. So, we have to keep that in mind. I mean, we're not historians, but, time changes our perspective, and things change.
Now, I think because of this, because there's sort of a question how Obama's tenure will be perceived at the end of the day, the Hillary Clinton campaign, or the pre-campaign, seems to be trying to minimize daylight with Obama. I mean, I presume she will pick her spots eventually, but she's taken on a bunch of Obama campaign staff and White House staff into her operation. And I believe some of the aides have said that there's really no advantage in fostering intra-party tension. They want to have a unified party. They don't want to have things be fractious going into the general election. They don't want to have a repeat of 2008. But at the same time, you have the Republicans. The RNC just put out another video trying to popularize the hashtag Obama's third term, as if that's sort of a proof that this would be a disastrous thing, and everyone would hate that. So while Clinton's trying to show unity and Republicans are trying to foster disunity, you have a flap going on amongst the insiders in the Clinton orbit, friction between those who were longtime Clinton supporters and some of the new Obama people now entering into the picture. And it seems like the biggest fight is between Jim Messina, who was Obama's 2012 campaign manager and is now heading up, I believe, Priorities USA, which was an Obama super PAC, but is now being repurposed to be a pro-Hillary super PAC. And David Brock. And David Brock was famous for writing "Blinded by the Right." He was doing hit pieces against Anita Hill for the conservatives in the Clinton days, but then he renounced his past and said that and he joined the Democratic Party and became very close to the Clintons. And he headed up Media Matters, and he had this project called Correct the Record, which was designed to refute attacks against Hillary. And he was given a board position on Priorities USA, seemingly as an attempt to sort of keep the Clinton and Obama wings together. But then some of the Obama people, apparently Messina, were critical of a fundraiser who was close to Brock, because she had a practice of taking a cut of the donations she collected, and which was legal but is frowned upon in some quarters. And Brock thought that the Obama people were trying to take out one of his allies, and so he quit the Priorities USA board. And now that's leading a question: do we have another 2008 Hillary Clinton campaign all over again, where all of this internecine warfare distracts from the actual issue at hand? Should Hillary Clinton be president or not? So I don't know if the Republicans are breaking out the popcorn and seeing this unfold.
Well, I do think first you mentioned Blinded by the Right. Blinded by the Light, originally a Bruce Springsteen song. Did you know that? He actually does a really cool version of it.
Right.
It's sort of like that Rosalita, that song he does.
Right.
So I think it's not the famous version. There's a more famous version. But anyway, that comes to mind. I think that there is something, I think that there is a sense, and you hear people like Reince Priebus say this, there is a sense that Hillary is not as good as she's given credit for. And that the left, we tend, at least I could say that those of us on the center right tend to think the left is I think we tend to attribute to them, almost maybe overestimate their competence. And it's safer, by the way, to do that. But it can also be intimidating. And I think there's a sense that Hillary is going to be just like Obama, and that they can mess policy up all they want, but when it comes to campaigning, when it comes to winning elections, they're going to find a way to do it, and they're going to run this competent. Because Hillary ran a horrible campaign in 2008, and there's reason to suspect that things aren't quite right, and this is just another piece of evidence that might lead you to believe that they don't have the magic that Obama had, and that maybe we're overestimating her talent and the team and the unity that she's going to have on her side. Bill, I do want to ask, while we're beating up on Obama, and I'm glad that that we're devoting this episode to doing that, because we need to probably do more of it on the show. What is up? We're talking about President Obama's kind of misdirection on gay marriage. But yesterday there was this thing where Jon Karl and White House spokesman Josh Earnest got into a back and forth where Josh Earnest refuses to is essentially alleging that the terrorist attack on what he calls a kosher deli, which was in fact, I believe, a grocery store, in Paris was, quote, randomly shoot a bunch of folks in a deli or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing what Carl's question. But in other words, the administration seems to be saying that that they were not targeting Jewish people when they went in there. And that seems to be implausible. And, you're not the spokesman for the administration, but help me figure out what the hell they're thinking by insisting that this was like another spontaneous event as opposed to targeting Jewish people.
Well, I don't know exactly. I haven't seen any kind of off the record on background quotes the administration further elaborating on it. But I generally approach these flaps with the mindset of there has to be a reason. There has to be a plausible reason. These are not morons that we're dealing with. You might disagree with what the reasoning is, but there has to be a reason for doing it. And just like with the National Prayer Breakfast thing that we talked about before, I assume it comes back to a strategic belief that they don't want the entire operation against ISIS, against Al Qaeda, against other radical Islamic terrorists. They don't want to be seen as a West versus Islam deal, and they want it to seem like the world is united against these isolated extremists. So perhaps, I'm just speculating here, I don't know if this is the actual reasoning or not, perhaps they think if this is seen as targeting a specific religious group, that maybe harms the ability for this to be seen as the world versus this tiny group of people, as opposed to, most people in the world are not Jews. So if it's seen like a battle between them, perhaps that undercuts the larger rhetorical framing that they're shooting for. There might be some other rationale for it that I don't understand. I guess I question whatever the reason is it so horrible to say that? I mean, what is lost I mean, the point was made by the White House press secretary. I mean, there were non-Jews that were killed. Yes, it was a kosher establishment, and I would assume it was the establishment was chosen for that reason. But it's so bad to acknowledge that non-Jews were killed. Also, what is lost strategically? What moral authority is dissipated by saying that? I guess the animus around it sort of eludes me.
But I don't think anyone's suggesting that there weren't some non-Jews killed. I think the question is that very clearly these terrorists targeted a Jewish grocery store, and that the White House either doesn't believe that or is refusing to just admit to something that's like painfully obvious. And it just seems weird. And it seems like the only rationale for them to do it is what you just described, and but I don't see how just being upfront and like recognizing what actually happened as a fact undermines the notion, destroys what they're trying to accomplish, which is to avoid this being, America versus the Islamic world, another crusade, so to speak, 2.0 or something like that. So I don't know. It seems this administration seems to be prevaricating and duplicitous and not shooting straight with journalists. And this is a trend, and it obviously goes to the top based on our previous conversation. And I think it's interesting in light of the Brian Williams news. So, I don't know. I'm not one to bash, I don't devote a ton of time to beating up Obama, but I think this week, I don't know, something got into me.
Well, let's leave it on that harsh and cynical note.
All right. Well, otherwise, stay warm up there in Northampton.
I'll do my best.
Is it Northampton or Northampton? How do you say it?
Northampton. I mean, it's one word.
Northampton.
Yeah, it's
Northampton.
It's not Northampton. It's Northampton.
One word.
One word.
All right, in Northampton. And plug some stuff, Bill. What do they need to read of yours that's out there?
I'll soldier on. Always good to talk to you, sir.
No. You're. I said plug some stuff. What do they need to read? Let's plug some stuff. I want to plug something, but you go first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I had the piece of Real Clear Politics this week, Obama versus FDR, Year 7. That's sort of the biggest thing I have to share with the world. What do you got?
All right, so I want people to check out my podcast, Matt Lewis in the News. I interviewed Chuck Todd last week. Really interesting interview, I think. And then I just had my friend John Hanlon on. We did an Oscar preview where we went through all 8 Best Picture nominees and discussed and ranked them. So spoiler alert, but check that out if you want to know what you need to see between now and the Oscars, or just frankly, you want to be able to make interesting conversation at your Oscar party without watching the movies. Check out that podcast as well.
Well, we'll do Oscar predictions next week.
I'm game, man. Bring it on. I do football. I do Oscars. I can, we wear many hats here. So.
Since I don't see any movies, I get to predict free of personal bias.
Well, sometimes those are the best predictions, The least you know, sometimes the better the prediction is. So. Not you, but any of us. This is not a commentary on your campaign prognostication. No, but sometimes knowing stuff messes it up, So, sometimes you have a better sense. That's why sometimes I read the book before I interview people, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's a better interview if you don't. Well, it can cut either way. You know?
All right. Till then. Till next week.
All right, Bill. See ya.
Take care.